Hey guys, so I had a thought come to me earlier today, and before I Googled it, before I looked into it, I wanted to make a YouTube video about it. Now, going back to a previous video about me talking about, U.S. government in exile, I wanted to show you guys something. Now, people can make an argument that the reason the United States is the way that it is because it's a superpower. But when we look at when it was used and how it was used, you'll see that it doesn't hold up. So it says the word superpower began to be used in its modern geopolitical sense during the 1940s, especially after World War II. A key milestone was the 1944 book, The Superpowers by William T.R. Fox. In that book, Fox described the major states capable of projecting military and political power on a global scale, particularly the United States, the Soviet Union, and the United Kingdom. But the only people who use the word superpower are not the foreign country. Like if you went to Iran, China, Japan, they wouldn't, well, maybe Japan, but they wouldn't call the United States a super, like they don't use the word superpower. The word superpower originated in America. The term became especially common during the Cold War, when the United States and Soviet Union were widely referred to as the words two superpowers. But it's not a Russian word. It's an American word they gave themselves. So to say that the United States is a superpower, in fact, there's people today who still say that the United States is the only superpower in the world. Yeah, we came up with that word. So if that doesn't cause you to question your reality of what the United States actually is, I don't know what to tell you. What country created the word superpower in one word? There's also another word that I want to look into. What country created the word superpower in one word? It says Britain. Britain. Interesting, when I asked this question to ChatGPT before, it said America. Although I do know that America uses the term more than Britain does. Like we're the main ones that use it. Like we use it today. I think we're the only country that does it, like I said. But it's a bunch of nonsense, really. What Americans doing. Term popularized by British foreign college William T.R. Fox in 1944. Although the modern dual concept was developed and used primarily in the English-speaking world rather than being officially created by a country. Yeah, it's English-speaking. It's used in English. They don't use in Russian. They don't use in Japanese. They don't use in Chinese, Arabic, whatever. It's only in English-speaking countries. Predominantly the United States. But yeah, the whole... And if you I actually discovered this recently, the whole Cold War thing, well, not even the Cold War thing, the whole World War II thing, well, in the USSR, I don't know much about Germany. But I know that the USSR, that was primarily, and people are going to hate me for this, based on information I've discovered in the last week or so, that it showed that the United States funded the USSR. That was Bolsheviks and all the Russia, the space race, all of it, communism, all of it was funded by the United States government years before World War I even existed. So I want to know something else. I want to know who created the word World War, because there's been a lot of wars out there. Lots of them have been as significant, if not more important than world wars. So, is it only called a world war because the United States is involved? Because World War One, um, that I don't remember what exactly the United States was doing in that one. I know that was Britain involved. Um, I used to know. Uh, I used to know a lot about World War One. All I remember is that they it was going into, was it Romania, but then they were able to push him out. Am I thinking about the Bolshevik Revolution? One of the two, and I know that the Bolshevik Revolution happened in like 1917, and World War One was in 19. When did it end? I know it was like 1911 or 1912, maybe 1914, somewhere around there. And then you had the Bolshevik Revolution. Russia was the first one to go down. Ukraine put up a war for about 3 years between the Red Army and the White Army. The Red Army being the Bolsheviks. And Ukraine eventually loses that. And then the USSR gets created through Russia, Belarus, Ukraine. Was there another one? And Romania was outside of that. Romania was a satellite state of the USSR. But yeah, all of that was funded pretty much by the United States. Well, not the Bolshevik Revolution, but, well, maybe potentially, maybe in a way, maybe it was. But I know that definitely with Russia involved, that would have been funded by the United States, which USSR, space race, Cold War, everything. This was before the CIA existed. They were just smack dab in the middle of it, and then they was talking about how bad communism was and all this. And it ended up they were actually telling the truth, but it wasn't about communism itself. It was about the United States and how they. I gotta go back and read through, because if that's true, I would think that there's like propaganda that CIA created that shows that it was the United States. I gotta look into that. I haven't read anything regarding any of that, but or I haven't even read much of propaganda back then, because it's all propaganda. They wanted you. There was some side that said capitalism was better, ideology was evil. I do believe that CIA does not like ideology, but because you create things like this, and then the ideologies themselves ended up infiltrating the governments, and then it created the problem we have today, and that was pretty much what the Cold War was, between communism and capitalism. Anyways, I'm going off track here. Where did the term World War come from? Because I really don't know. Where did that come from? World War emerged in the English-speaking world, because of course it did. Particularly in Britain and the United States during the early 20th century. It's always you two, isn't it? I see a theme we're running into here. Now, I knew that the United States, of course they would create that word. Britain, what else did... Yeah, Britain they created superpower. So I feel like there's this theme going on here that all of what we understand about the world is coming from Britain and the United States. Is that the theme we're heading for here? It says, before 1914, some writers had already used phrases like World War to describe the hypothetical global conflict. After the outbreak of World War I, the phrase became much more common. At the time, people also called it the Great War or the World War. And in Russia, it wasn't called the World War. It was called the Patriotic War. It was the Patriot War. What was it called? Was it the Patriotic War? Because there's a museum in Kiev that I've been to, and it's like it's called the Museum of the Patriotic War. Yeah, it's not called World War, but that's what we would see it as. That's our equivalent. And to them, it's a lot different because they were actually fighting for their. It was a patriotic war. Patriotic war because they were coming to. The Germans were coming into their land and they were defending themselves. We tell a different story in America where it's just all these countries coming together. But there's been several wars where that has happened. The war in Israel that destroyed Jerusalem. That involved Persia. That involved the Roman Empire. I think which wasn't that Italy, Italy at the time. I don't think what. I don't think France was involved. Maybe I don't know. I don't know much about. All I know is that there was Persians. There were the people who lived at the time that is now known as Crimea, and then you had the Roman Empire. And then the Roman Empire, they had all that stuff going on. So yeah, there's been a lot of wars out there, but it seems to be that whenever you have the United States involved, or even Britain, then it's something catastrophic or something significant of importance. More so Britain than the United States, but you know, that's someone where the origin is most closely associated with Britain. So Britain has both superpower and I know that Britain was very powerful. In fact, they have the most powerful navy in the world. Whenever the United States needs help, they call the British Navy. And it is it's pretty powerful. We might got more. I've heard about the British Navy, and they're pretty badass. But then they don't. Yeah, it's a whole thing. They take their navy, their naval stuff seriously. Most of our stuff is on land or in the air. That's what we're known for. But yeah, it's interesting how Britain is involved. Like, is Britain... And I thought about that too. Was Britain paying... I know that historically, Britain would be the one that makes the United States feasible. They will come up with the United States government. But Russia also makes an appearance in the history of the United States regarding the Civil War. A lot of people don't know that. A lot of people don't know that Abraham Lincoln, he had an agreement with the Russians. And the United States government was helping a lot with, like, the famines with this in Russia, the SARS. This was serfdom. This was what was going on. And America, there was a painting. Let's see if we can find it. There was a painting where, I know when I see it, I don't remember what it was called. Painting of America helping Russia. Yeah, this is the painting. Yeah, it was about the food and famine. Yeah. Let's see what this says. The most famous paintings depicted... Let's see if we can see... Okay, it's working on OBS. Depicting Americans helping Russians are the help ship and food distribution by the renowned Russian marine artist Ivan Avasovsky. I'm trying. Avasovsky. Created in 1892. So this is after the Civil War, but before World War I. These historical canvases commemorate the U.S. humanitarian aid sent to the Russian Empire to relieve a devastating famine. During the deadly Russian famine of 1891 to 1892, private American citizens and voluntary organizations dispatched 5 ships carrying over 10,000. That was another thing. The United States government was not behind this. They were, it was private citizens, people, just the average everyday people, carrying this food and everything for Russians. 10,000 tons of corn flour and grain to alleviate the suffering of the Russian peasantry. Deeply moved by this voluntary gesture of friendship, Aviasovsky captured the events from canvas. One painting depicts the arrival of an American supply ship in a Baltic port, while the other shows a Russian sleigh driver waving an American flag to welcoming crowds. Aviasovsky brought the paintings to America as a token of gratitude and presented them to the Corcoran Gallery of Art. After being displayed at the White House, notably during the Kennedy administration, and spending years in private collections, these historic works were auctioned in 2008 and eventually returned to Washington, D.C. Yeah, it was this painting, yeah. You see the Russian flag right there, it's the American flag. Um, yeah, it was private citizens. Um, but the U.S. government did a lot with. Let's see if ChatGPT can tell us more about that. Um, let's see. How do I ask this? I had heard about this years ago, about the time when I did up those paintings. Someone had sent it to me. A Ukrainian, my Ukrainian friend sent it to me. Like, I never heard of this before. I think he might have told me this too. I don't remember. It was a long time ago. It said, did Abraham Lincoln have Russia as a backup plan if the U.S. lost against the South? Let's say the Union. Because at the time it was the Union, not the United States. Well, it was the same thing, but, you know. If the Union lost against the South, in one word. It says no. It says no. So everyone had an official plan to relocate to or seek refuge in Russia. That's not what I asked. Russia was generally friendly toward the Union, but the idea that Russian, as Lincoln's backup plan, is not supported by mainstream support. So what I'm saying here is, and I don't know why it interpreted it like that. What I had heard, and we're gonna go into Google, and we're gonna see. But what happened was, Abraham Lincoln had a plan with Russia. If the United States, if the Union lost against the South, which the South had, Great Britain had sympathy towards the South, so they were allies. If the Union had failed and lost against the South, then Russia would have stepped in. And you might have had Great Britain step in after that. So, yeah, we would be living in a much different world if that would have happened. But, let's see. I didn't mean to do that. I wish there was like some sort of autocorrect in like something like that. So I gotta go back in there and delete that. During the American Civil War, President Abraham Lincoln's administration of the Russian Empire under Tsar Alexander II maintained a crucial and unusual alliance. Russia was the only major European power that formally backed the Union, driven by geopolitical rivalry with Great Britain, who I said was at the south, and a shared opposition to forced slavery. That's interesting. Shared opposition to forced labor. I don't know if that aged well. Mm. In the winter of 1863, the Russian Navy sent its Baltic Fleet to New York and its Pacific Fleet to San Francisco. While the ships came partly for their own protection to avoid being blockaded by Britain, the presence of the Russian fleet was widely celebrated by the North as a show of support for the Union war effort. So yeah, they were about to step in if the Union had lost. And I already had questions about whether it was really about slavery, what started the Civil War. Um, so let's ask that question again. So, was Russia going to help the Union if it had lost against the South? He said not necessarily. Russia was generally sympathetic to the Union during the American Civil War. In 1860, Russia even sent a naval squadrons to American ports, a move often interpreted as a show of support for the Union and a warning to powers such as the United Kingdom and France against intervening on behalf of the Confederacy. However, there's no evidence that Russia had a firm commitment to militarily rescue the Union if it had lost the war. Russian support was primarily diplomatic and strategic, tied to Russia's own interests in Europe, rather than an alliance requiring military intervention. So his short answer is probably not but diplomatically, yes. I actually heard, and I've only heard this from one source. When I was in college, um, studying to be in the DEA and everything, when I was getting all that sorted out, there was a book that I had read, and it talked about why the Civil War had happened. It was, and they said that Great Britain, the United Kingdom, I think it was UK, whatever it was. Yeah, it was the UK today. But anyways, they said that they started manufacturing tobacco and cigarettes and all this in Great Britain, and then they brought some of that stuff over here for Americans to do. So the South, these plantations were growing tobacco, and the North, they were growing tobacco, but they weren't using slavery to do it. They were using machinery. So, and the government was getting taxes from the tobacco thing. So you could say it was a drug war back in the early day. Now I was never able to find out any other sources saying that, but I did read that in a book, and it could be true. I mean, given all that was going on at that time. So, yeah, um, so yeah, the U.S. government was getting money from the plantations and the machinery that was selling the tobacco, but they were but then something happened, and then slavery got involved, and I don't think it was about slavery. I think it was about control of the United States. I think it was, the United States government didn't have much to go on. The Virginians probably was seeing that 1846 invalidated the U.S. government, and so so they might have started an uprising, and then they were the cause of this civil war, which after the Union won, they said that was all about slavery, taking over plantations, having the North, and all this. But I don't think that's actually the truth. I think that it was actually because the United States government had to appear legitimate. So in order to do that, it had the 14th Amendment. It took away sovereign rights from the states, which it happened. Congress had approved constitutions from both the North and the South in order to gain more control, and we ended up being in slavery because we lost all the rights and independence for states. States like Texas, Wyoming, all of them. If you wanted me to be precise. Um, so yeah, I think that we're playing a role because it wasn't about slavery. I don't think. I honestly do not think the government cared about slavery. If anything, they would use the slaves as a cover for that, saying that, oh, well, we're just here to protect the slaves. But no, it wasn't about protecting slaves. It was about control of what they had lost and trying to appear legitimate. And I have a feeling that that is going to bite them big time in the ass when shit hits the fan. But so we don't know if Russia would ever had gotten into because the Union won, but we don't. But I mean, it could have happened. I mean, you could have seen the World War, maybe World War One on American land, if the Union lost. That's a thought experiment that you could have. But I think at the end of the day, even still, I think that at that point, even if that had happened, I think that we would still have the USSR, we would still have the space race, we would still have all these things happening. But whoever was going to win that, like you could say it was Britain that won it, whether Russia won it, we would have happened anyway. I mean, maybe if it was Great Britain, we would be more isolationist, and we might have taken over like other countries like Venezuela, Cuba. Maybe we would have done that sooner. But if Russia had won, we would have just given money to Russia, and then they would have been able to fund communism, which tells me that the Russia would have probably won either way. If history turned out to be this way, whether it was the Union that won or the South that won, and then Russia came in, we would have still had Russia. We would still be in the same position we're in today, honestly. So it really changes your perspective on how, if things weren't different with the Civil War, would things have really changed? Probably not, unless of course if Great Britain won. So the United States government, it seems like they came from Great Britain, but it seemed like they were more on the side of Russia. And that's what we saw here. Russia was on the side of the Union, like supporting the Union. And I do believe that's true. It does coincide to how history played out. But that's like, if that's true, that's like the CIA before the CIA existed, because that sounds like something the CIA would do. They would create technically it's a shadow government that appears as one. Yeah, I definitely think that we are a government in exile. Now you could ask yourself, well, who's the government in exile here? Are we talking about the government in Washington D.C. or are we talking about a government that moved outside? In Poland, it was the government in exile was the one that was in London. However, you could also say the government in exile was also the one that was exiled, that no one was listening to, that was in Poland. Both could be true. In the United States, what would have happened was Virginia would have been its own independent country. It would have been on its own after rest of secession, because it can stand on its own. And that's pretty much where America was born, was in Virginia. It's where I think most if not all, our founding fathers were born in Virginia. Washington was born in Virginia. So I think Benjamin Franklin was also, I think maybe John Adams, I think they were born in Virginia. I know that George Washington was. Let's ask Judge P that question. Were all the founding fathers... Now, at the time, this was when it was, of course, the British colonies. In one word, were the founding fathers born in Virginia? It says no. I know that most of them were. I think one of them. I don't know who it was. Maybe it was John. I don't know. Maybe it was John Adams. I don't know. I really don't know much about that. I know for sure that Washington was. Who was the felon he's not born in a sentence? Just give me a sentence. Many founding fathers were not born, including John Adams, Senator Adams, Benjamin Franklin, Alexander Hamilton, and John Jay. Yeah. Yeah, I know that George Washington was. Um, so let me think. So what would happen was, if if the United States government retroceded land back to Virginia, what would have either happened? Well, what was supposed to happen was Virginia would be exempt from all U.S. government stuff. They would be their own independent country. There would be a country at that point. Washington, D.C. would have either dissolved or it would have become sovereign territory. And then the U.S. government would have moved to moved to Maryland, because it took Maryland and Virginia to both cede land to create Washington, D.C. That's the Residence Act of 1790. So, without Virginia, there's no Washington, D.C. that the federal government resides in. So there's no U.S. government. If the U.S. government wanted to continue its work, it would have to go to Maryland. You could say, well, if Washington, D.C. doesn't exist anymore, then you would be on land that belongs to Maryland, because Virginia had its land back to Virginia. That was used to create Washington, D.C. Makes sense? So you could say that, well, right now, the U.S. government, the Republican U.S. government, exists both in Washington, D.C. and both in Maryland. Well, you could say, well, Washington, D.C. doesn't exist and exists at the same time. So your exiled government is exactly in the same place as the legitimate government used to be in, but it's not legitimate anymore. So it just happens to be in the same place. And all this where it's always been. So it's both there and not there at the same time. Yet, because of 1846, the Retrocession Act violated the Residency Act, which made Washington, D.C. there and not there at the same time. And you can actually tell that when you actually go to D.C., you can actually tell there's stuff going on that's like, if they really cared about this place, there wouldn't be I've talked about the algae and the ducks and the reflecting pool. You've heard it. Trump repainted it and now it's got algae again. I don't know. Maybe that never even happened in the algae. They didn't even do anything. The reflecting pool has been there. The same one, not changed. No blue paint or anything. Who knows? I haven't been there since I left. But it could have changed. It might not have changed. I don't know at this point. But you would think that if people had respect for Washington, D.C., there wouldn't be trash underground. They do. The city does. The municipalities, they do clean all the trash. They do a good job. I really do the trash cleanup. They really do a good job. But as far as like the reflecting pool and all that other stuff, they really don't give a damn. They don't. The Potomac River, it's the most toxic river. They had sewage go into it. Like, they don't care. If Congress really cared, if it really meant something to them, they would. But it's just a place where they're at. And they gotta make you believe that it's all real. That is based on everything I've seen, and I've been there, and everything I've read and understood of things. This government does not care about that no, U.S. government doesn't care because they're not they're exiled. You know, why would they care? They just got to make you believe that they're real, that your money is real. They build all these corporations, they give out all this money to other countries, they put advances on it, they take the money out, and they give it to people, and they say, we're a real country. If we're not real, then how are we able to do this? But you know what? You know what happens to countries that don't accept U.S. dollars? They go to war with them. Venezuela. Um, you know, they want to make you believe that they have influence over the world. They try to create all these. There's like, what is there? Like 250 whatever military bases now all around the world that belong to the United States. We're the only country that has the military that big around the world. It's just all for show and performance, really. So, I mean, conservatives say, well, they're going to make it better. No one's going to make that better. You can't go back on 1946. You either exist or you don't. And if it doesn't exist and you manage to get into power, you're going to end up creating World War III, of course, because it involves the United States. But to everyone else, they're just be saying, oh, well, these are just a bunch of people just throwing, these are just a bunch of countries just throwing nukes at each other. That's what they're going to see. United States, they're going to lose everything. So, you know. And, you know, it's like, why are we even here? Like, why are we even voting in all this stuff? I mean, because it don't matter. It never mattered. Not in the last few generations. Several generations, actually. Well, it hasn't been that long. It's been like, what? Maybe 7 generations? Maybe. My mom, my grandma, my grandparents, my great-grandparents. How many generations is that? 1, 2, 3. Yeah, about 7 generations ago. Which isn't a very long time. All things considered. But a lot of things have happened in the last 200 years, 250 years. But yeah, America is 250 years old, but the United States government is only 180 or 162 years old if you want to count as a kill against the states. That would be post-Civil War. If you want, it's 180 if you go back to 1846. So, you know, it's both legitimate and illegitimate at the same time. But eventually, the truth is going to come out, and the illegitimacy is going to outweigh. It's a shadow government. You could say that's a shadow government. And it would have happened whether it was communism, whether it was Russia, and this was even before. And this was before the Russians even were enemies. I mean, we were their friends, and we did it to ourselves. But I wasn't part of that. You know, we weren't part of that because we were independent states. But in order to get recognition and be claimed that we were something in the world, we had to go get approved by Congress through the 14th Amendment, include all the slaves and all that. Dude, I think that was all. I think that's a very moot point in the grand scheme of the United States government. You know, I think there was a lot more to that. So I don't think it was just slavery of, you know, and then they had the 2/3 vote. I think that the 2/3 vote that's something else entirely, I think. Um, um, Actually, I think that was, but yeah, they try to word it in such a way that just apply to everybody, not just the blacks. So yeah, that was a whole mess too. But yeah, I think it was a reconstruction of the U.S. government itself, not just how the states were. And if you know history, historians would understand that fact. But you have to, that everything that's about to happen to us in the future, everything that gets destroyed, even our successes, all the money that, you know, NASA, if you want to see that as a success, all this other stuff, the corporations, our laptops, all this fancy stuff we got now that other countries don't have, that was created because of a false government wanted to make itself look legitimate, pretty much. So you could say it's a good thing or a bad thing, but either way, we're here and we're suffering from people who were born way before 7 generations before we existed. 6, well, anywhere between 5 to 7 generations ago, were didn't have a choice in any of this. So there was democracy yet. So yeah, it's I mean, we're just being real here. So yeah, I thought I was only going to take like 10 minutes because I wanted to understand what the word World War One, where that came from. But we ended up having this whole entire discussion about this, which helps because I'm planning on doing a video. And if you got that in your mind right now, then that would make sense if I do it when I do that future video. So I don't got to cover all of this again. So, anyways, I'll end it here, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye for now.